Started. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I am Sharon Green Middleton, Vice President of the City Council, representative for the 6th Council District, and Chairperson of the Economic and Community Development Committee. This afternoon, we will hear the following bills. 23-0356, zoning modifications to research and development facility use. The second bill is 23-0396, city streets closing a 20-foot alley and two 10-feet alleys. The third bill is 23-0361, a zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 2 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district, variances 1613 Edmondson Avenue. And the fourth bill, 23-0343, zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 3 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district, variances 633 South Munford Avenue. And bill number 23-016R, the study and report eviction chattels. Disposal of tenants' possession is going to be put in recess by the request of the sponsor. So we're going to do another date for that particular bill. I know that someone had sent in written testimony. All that is in place, and we're just going to reschedule for another hearing. So in attendance today, we have members of the committee, John Bullock of the 9th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mark Conway of the 4th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Odette Ramos of the 14th District, and Robert Stokes of the 12th District present. Representatives from the Office of the President. Who is he? Thank you. We have someone here representing the Office of the President in his legislative analyst office. And representative of the Mayor's office, we have Nina Thimulus and Dominic McAlley. And Nina's not here, but we do have Dominic. Let's begin. Bill number 23-0356, zoning modifications to research and development facilities for the purpose of amending the definition of research and development establishment, creating use standards for research and development establishments, amending certain tables of uses to reflect revised use provisions for research and development establishments in certain zoning districts. This bill was introduced on February 27th, 2023, and the bill is sponsored by the Council President on behalf of the for the administration. And we'll start with agency reports, and we'll start with the Planning Commission.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. If you'd like, BDC kind of spearheaded this one, so I'm happy to defer to them if they'd like to start off.
Yes, if you'd like to start, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dan Taylor. I'm the Managing Director of Business Neighborhood Development for Baltimore Development Corporation. And thank you to members of the committee as well. We have a brief presentation. As you mentioned, this was introduced in February, so we'll try to keep this quick and just provide a quick refresh as to what this bill is about. This really originated with the Baltimore Together Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. The particular item around research and development facilities, which we also call wet labs, was an important point of that strategy that was rolled out last year. In particular, the goal around being world-class leaders for Baltimore City in key industry sectors, in particular the sector of life sciences. Within this report, this particular item is called out as a key action item, and it pops up there that there's a key step to develop additional wet lab space in order to retain and grow businesses in Baltimore City. And what we're seeing in the life sciences is that we have a lot of wonderful companies that are incubated at our institutions, at Hopkins, at Maryland, places like that. And as they grow, they do not have a place to locate to. They have to, they leave their incubation stage, and there's not a landing spot for them to go, and so they leave the city entirely, right at that point where they would have started major hiring or major investment. So the particular issue that we're facing is to solve that gap and find a way to retain these businesses in Baltimore City by finding physical locations that they can grow into once they leave that incubation space at Hopkins, Maryland, et cetera. We actually did a particular supplement to Baltimore Together, specifically around the life sciences, and this topic came up 4 times. And they're going to be a little small for you all to be able to see as they pop up here. But we have a supply and demand imbalance. We're at a 1% vacancy rate around wet lab space, which means there is no space for new businesses to move into. So there is a need to increase the supply to satisfy this demand. We also have, well, here's the 1% point. We have this shortage of available space. And one of the strategies to solving for this problem is to increase the number of places where these types of facilities can be developed. We looked at conversion within this report of existing buildings for wet lab space, and we looked also at the construction of new wet lab space to increase the inventory overall. So that's really the genesis of this rezoning bill. The main purpose is to increase the number of places where these types of facilities can be located. And I've got a couple tables and the maps to explain why that is. So first, what this bill is actually doing. This is not a new use in the zoning code. Research and development facilities are already defined in the zoning code. And we have proposed making a couple of changes to those definitions. When these were put into place, this is now many, many years ago, they were primarily defined in the industrial use categories. And the tables that we've proposed modifications to, it shows that as, they're under these industrial headers. Those are more for organizational purposes of the code, but they're classified as industrial all over the place. The modern wet lab facility, the modern research and development facility, is not an industrial facility. This is not a big vaccine manufacturing facility or something like that. This is a place for people to do lab work, right, with hoods and vents and beakers and Bunsen burners and those sorts of things. But they functionally are almost identical, and they look and feel very much like a modern office building. And when you see the facilities that have been built on Hopkins campus, on Maryland's campus, down at City Garage in Port Covington, they're indistinguishable in many ways from a regular office building. They're not big industrial facilities. But the code, as it was defined before, kind of treated them in the same way that they treated industrial facilities. They're allowed in all of the industrial zoning categories already. They're allowed in a bunch of the institutional, the educational campus areas. And they're allowed in C5, which is downtown, right, the C5 district, and they're not allowed anywhere else. And so when we looked in increasing the number of places that these could go, we also wanted to take a look at the definition itself. So one amendment, part of this amendment that we've proposed, is changing the definition, which, as it was written, excluded any sort of industrial use altogether. So it was kind of a funny definition because it was allowed in industrial areas, but it specifically did not allow any manufacturing, fabrication, assembly, anything like that. So what we have proposed here is allowing those only as an accessory use. So you would still be able to do your research and development, but these companies need to be able to do prototyping and hand assembly and kind of small scale, not production level industrial work, but little things to be able to test concepts and prototyping and so forth. So this definition amends to allow that type of use, assembly, manufacturing, and so forth, as an accessory use to the existing definition. It builds in some restrictions. This is in this exclusions category. I'm sorry, I misspoke on exclusions category. It's in the use standards category. To make sure that whatever those operations are, which are only accessory to the main use, that they all happen inside the building, that they minimize noise, they minimize heat, glare, anything that might happen with any sort of industrial process. And again, this is not really like an industrial process. And that it minimized truck traffic. And this is the same definition that's already in the zoning code when we talk about light industrial uses. It's the exact same definition. So we proposed those modifications, and then we proposed an increase in the number of zoning categories where these could be placed. We are recommending that it be allowed in C4, it's already allowed in C5, that it be allowed in C3 as a conditional use with board approval, and that it be allowed in all of the transit-oriented development districts, TOD1 through TOD4. So those are the changes that we're proposing. This is what the zoning looks like right now. This is where these facilities can currently be located, under current code. It looks like a lot of space, but if you look at where those things are, these are really industrial. This is the industrial part of Baltimore City. And these are not big industrial uses, and it's not fitting with what is needed by the market, in part because the sites are too large, right? You have to build this big facility if you're going to have a big piece of industrial land. We are proposing adding in, I skipped one, or I put them in the wrong order. There we go. We are proposing adding in the orange areas here. This would be your C4 and your TOD districts. And in the black, that would be the C3 as a conditional use. So relatively small addition in terms of the footprint, overall footprint compared to what's there right now. But you can see it's located in places distributed around the city onto primarily smaller, commercially concentrated sites where these types of uses would be appropriate. And we also understand that the Department of Housing is proposing an amendment to this bill to add in C2 areas greater than 1 acre. We did map that to see what it would look like for our purposes, and it would add a handful of additional sites represented on the screen in orange to do C2 greater than 1 acre. So taken all together, if this bill were to be passed with the amendment, the updated areas where these uses would be allowed is shown here in the blue and the orange coloring. And so that concludes my presentation, and I'll leave it to the committee for any questions.
Thank you. What's the advantage of including the TOD areas?
Yeah, so the TOD areas, a lot of this was driven by the TOD, which is a desire to have dense clustered development around transit areas. And part of what we're trying to do is really retain these companies that ideally bring with them a number of jobs. And we thought that it was good land use policy to have those jobs clustered around transit sites. And so to have this denser development using potentially some of these businesses or some of these facilities as anchors of those transit sites that can drive the denser development there.
Okay. And then my second question, I know that in Howard County, there's a state, like a hub facility, Ken Allman, it's named after Ken Allman. Is the city affiliated with that? I know in that building, they also have businesses that do lab work. Are you connected with that facility at all?
So I think we have toured a number of facilities around the state to get an understanding of what else is out there in other jurisdictions. Unfortunately, my colleague, Siobhan Kaintuck, who's our life sciences person, has tested positive for COVID as of this morning, and she would be able to speak specifically to that, and I want to acknowledge her work on this as well. But so I don't actually know the answer to that question.
I guess that would be a request if she could just answer that question and give the information to Tony so the committee can know what that answer is, just if there's any connection with, not just with Howard County, but any other surrounding areas to, keep that partnership and all going, and if what you're proposing is going to be an enhancement to those facilities as well, since they are state facilities that really help anyone around the state, including Baltimore City. Does my committee
Madam
have-
Chair.
Yes,
I have a question.
Councilman,
Thank you, Madam
Councilman
Chair.
Stokes.
First of all, I want to thank you because I know we got that wet lab coming over in the 12th district near Chick Webb, and we found out that we had to change the zoning right away, and I think this is what that is coming from. My question is there a required square footage when you talk about having wet labs at other locations throughout the city?
Is there a minimum
The
required square
size
foot?
is-
No.
You don't have to be, okay. I like it because it's going to stabilize the area with the development of a Chick Webb. But my question is there some, I know they create jobs, and you got Dunbar High School right down the street, which is a health curriculum who work closely with Hopkins. Will y'all be partnering with Hopkins in terms of trying to create a path, create that kind of opportunities for high school students so that once they get experience at Dunbar, I guess they can go right up the street, gain more experience, and be actually working at that location?
Yeah, so there is a workforce development strategy that's also built into this Baltimore Together plan around wet labs, and there are a number of organizations locally that are training people to get jobs in these facilities without the need for, a PhD or a master's degree, in many cases just a high school diploma or a GED, plus some additional certifications. They are themselves looking for additional space because there's a lot of demand for that service to get people built in as lab techs primarily. So there is a very good opportunity for this type of direct workforce development training with partners in the city that are doing that training now and identifying students from Dunbar or other locations to get them into some of these new private facilities.
Madam Chair, can we get a list of the information you just said? And my next question is, I would like to sit down as Chair of Education, I'd like to sit down with you and maybe school systems, how we create and make sure that happen, because they right next door to each other, and it don't require a master's degree. And what you just said, there should be an opportunity, there should be a curriculum probably at Dunbar using as a pilot program, so once they finish there, they can just go right into that type of work that they're doing. So I would love to sit down, talk to you, catch up with you, and see how we can make it happen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good question. With the CTE high schools around the city, that would be a really good connection. Any other questions at this point? Yes, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you be a little bit more specific as to what types of research and development would be done, and what lab-based? I mean, I know it's research and development, but it's not. I'm just making things up because I just need to know a little bit more about what it is. I mean, it's not like testing on animals and makeup, or is it like makeup technology, or is it, AI, or is it like, what is it that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I don't think that the code is specific as to the types of this. The work that we're seeing.
The code shouldn't be, but I'm just curious what you're thinking.
The work that we're seeing and that we're really trying to find a home for are things that are coming out of like Hopkins and Maryland biotech labs in particular. So we're talking AI certainly could be something like that. There's a lot of certainly the biology and chemistry type of work that needs to happen. We see things in robotics. That's a really, really big one that we're seeing is research and development around robotics technology and being able to prototype those, especially robotics technology that is in the medical world. So kind of like your nanotechnologies, the creation of nano fabrics and fibers and those types of things. These are things that are happening in Baltimore currently that we are looking to find homes for. And I would say, I don't know if that is the predominant class or that's what it will be in the future, but that's certainly the types of businesses that we're losing right now.
I guess the question, I asked this when we did our briefing a few months ago, so just to put it out to the public, I mean, I think that when people hear about BioLab, and maybe Mr. Chair had to experience this when they were doing that work in EBDI, but I think there are going to be some residents, particularly if we're thinking about C2s, which are closer to neighborhoods, that are going to say like, oh my gosh, a chemical is going to get out and, be an epidemic or, that kind of stuff. And so I think we just want to think through what exactly are we talking about here? Why is doing it in a C2 make sense? Is there a risk to, you know what I mean? So just to try to figure out the best way, because I mean, I can just see if somebody's doing research on some vaccine or something like that, which we want them to. We want everybody to come here, absolutely. But just to quell those kinds of questions that we might have.
Sure, understood. And there are certainly controls, and I know Siobhan would speak to this in prior briefings, around the handling of materials and how disposal of any materials would be handled. It's really not dissimilar from your doctor's office, right, with your sharps and general things like that. So this is not a novel or new thing in the city right now, even in well-populated areas. Like I said, C5 is where these are currently allowed and happening, right? These facilities do exist. But we can speak to that, you know, more as a response as it relates to those types of controls that might be required.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, just because I mean, you're already, like you said, you're in C5, so it's not like you're out in the industrial, you know, zoning, although you could be. But what does that look like? Because I can imagine some of my residents, for instance, if there was something that was put in a C2 and they were afraid of what might be there because we don't know what it is,
Yep.
that would be an issue.
And certainly C2, one of the reasons it was not in the original bill was in response to that concern that you raised in our briefing. We are supportive of the HCD amendment around C2 because we do think it would add a number of really high quality locations for these types of facilities to exist, but want to acknowledge that we really want this bill to move forward even without that amendment, to the degree that C2 is a point of hesitation for the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to, thank you, moving on to the Planning Commission.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Eric Teeser here for the Planning Commission. They reviewed this bill in their meeting of May 18th and recommended approval with one minor amendment, just to insert the word indoors to clarify that all the products must be contained indoors entirely within a research and development facility. So otherwise, we're in favor, and just looking at how this fits into the big picture. When I started working for planning 23 years ago, we had industrial zones and commercial zones and nothing else. There were a lot of instances where industry is getting cleaner. It's looking more like an office park. And so in our comprehensive rewrite, you start seeing things like bioscience campus zoning, office industrial campus zoning. This is now starting to go to the other side of that line, where how can this fit into commercial zones? So we think that it fits with that overall broadening, and so we're in support.
Thank you. Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, Director of Legislative Services for DHCD. We stand by our bill report in support of the amendment and passage of this bill. As BDC mentioned, we are suggesting a friendly amendment that was included with our bill report, and I also have some copies here if anyone would like to see it. What that amendment would do would further expand this use into C2 zoning districts for properties 1 acre or larger. So that's important to note, and it would be conditional to BMZA approval. We believe that this amendment will expand the options for economic development in additional commercial areas and create stronger, more walkable neighborhoods in which individuals can walk to work in these small bioscience companies that will be in these small to mid-sized spaces. We are also in support of planning's amendment and support of the Baltimore Development Corporation's efforts to move this bill forward. So we are pleased to offer this amendment today, and we do stand by ready to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Stephanie. And back to the Planning Commission, Councilman Stokes has a question.
Real quick, I know I asked about the required size. My concern is why there's not a required size when you're talking about this type of lab, wet lab. It's kind of concerning. I mean, I support it. I think it's great. But if there's not a required square footage, how do you determine to put a wet lab anywhere else? Well, you can put it in a house? I mean, no size. I don't understand it. Can you explain it?
Well, I would defer to BDC on that since they are the experts. Siobhan, who's unfortunately not able to be here, worked in that industry, so she'd be the better resource. There could be a minimum square footage to a building size if you're concerned about that. Having commercially zoned residences does exist, so in theory, that could be a possibility if it were a C3, but it'd be vanishingly rare. As I look
We'll
across
only
that-
say that because if you start installing these wet labs in different communities and you don't have a required square footage, I mean, it's like, okay, we're gonna take this house, and it just don't add up to me in terms of putting wet labs in neighborhoods or wherever you put them, and there's not required square footage or what the size should be.
So in terms of the places where we're proposing this in the bill, they're definitely not in neighborhoods like a house. Even the C3 proposal here would be conditional by BMZA approval, and I would hope that BMZA would say it's not appropriate to put a wet lab in a house if someone tried to spot zone that to C3 or something like that. C2, which is even closer to kind of residential communities, does have a minimum lot size of 1 acre under this amendment. So it would also, the intent here is to keep some amount of separation between what are these office buildings and the spaces themselves. We're reluctant to say that there's an appropriate size for a wet lab building, because one of the challenges that led us into this situation is that the places where they can be built now were too big, and we want the ability primarily to get more of these built, primarily by smaller developers through building reuse, or other things like that. So an actual lab, you know, for like one person could be relatively small, just a couple hundred of square feet. Because of the cost of equipment that you need in order to run a wet lab, we don't think that anyone would actually do that. It would be too small. So there needs to be a certain amount of size. But we wanted to avoid being prescriptive to say, you know, it needs to be 5,000 square feet or it needs to be 10,000 square feet or whatever the case may be, because we do want the ability for the private development side, along with the people who are running these facilities, to have some amount of flexibility in getting into spaces that they otherwise wouldn't. And I'll give you an example. There's a building downtown that is run by the company that runs the lab, essentially, also bought the building. And this is a somewhat unusual situation for things right now, because the buildings are so big and so expensive that the little companies would never be able to afford them. But something like this would allow potentially a startup or a second stage business to buy an existing small building on their own and fit it out for wet lab space for their purposes. And we wanted to kind of make sure that there were adequate opportunities for that type of thing to occur, because we think that's how we really increase the supply as well.
But you said some of it too big, right? So some too big, you don't have a square footage of something too small? I mean, if
Yeah.
it's too big, well, what's too small? What's not small enough? And I want to just mention that the wet lab you have on Carolina Street, right up the street is a brand new development we just did off of Carolina and Madison Street. And I know one of my colleagues was talking about neighborhoods and a concern about some of the issues when you say wet lab. So I still don't understand why you don't have a square footage, but this one's too big. But this could be any size.
Yeah, and
That's
when I say they're too big, what I mean is they're very successful, right? All the wet labs that have been built are full. They've all been leased. They're all occupied. So they're not too big in that sense. They're too big in that it requires an extraordinary amount of money to develop these facilities, which means we don't get enough of them and we don't get them fast enough. 4 MLK, which is under construction right now, is an example of a gigantic building that's going to do a wonderful job of alleviating this crunch of lab space for us. But that is a multi-million-dollar institutionally backed development. And to date, that's what pretty much all of these have been, really, really big institutionally backed wet lab developments. And we think that there's an unmet space right now for individual businesses to be able to build things out on their own, even small-scale businesses, and a number of private sector developers that exist in this space all around the state to step in and take on more modest-sized projects and reduce our supply imbalance by putting in a number of smaller scale facilities that don't take a decade to develop and $200 million to finance.
So you said that you don't want to put them in residential neighborhoods. Well, not even a block away is where we just did new development on Caroline and Madison Street. So when you say that's not even, if you go north on Caroline Street, as soon as you cross Monument Street, you're in a whole brand new development just been done. So I don't know what y'all mean by you don't want to do it in residential. That's just as close as residential as you can get. So saying it and where you put that one is right now on Caroline Street, and you half a block, you in now brand new development. So I don't, could you explain what you mean by you don't want to put them in residential? Because that is definitely
Yeah, when we
in
say
residential.
when I'm saying residential here, we're saying kind of residential row house or single family home neighborhoods. That the use here is a building, right? It's a big 4, 5, 6 story building, right? Some commercial use like an office building. And so to put that in a neighborhood, with yards and so forth would be inappropriate regardless of what's happening
I'm not
inside.
saying actually put one in a row house.
Yeah.
I'm saying there are people that just moved in a new development. We rehab that whole area, and that's a half a block away from the wet lab right now. I'm not talking about putting one there. I'm talking about a residential building not too close to residential.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how close you can get. You might as well just move the wet lab up the street and it's right there. So that's what my concern is.
Yeah, there are existing facilities in the city right now that are legal, right? They're operating today that are across the street or next door to apartment buildings. It's happening right now all around the city.
It's kind of concerning because when you talk to the community, they want to actually know what the wet lab do, what they doing inside of the facility. And to say we don't go to close to residential, I mean, you put that one there, it's there. I mean, I don't understand how you can explain that, saying that you said you don't put in residential, then you say there's one across the street from an apartment building. It kind of don't add up in terms of you saying you don't want them close to residential. I don't know how close you can get than Caroline and Madison Street or Miami Street. So it was concerning for me, that's all.
So it sounds to me like, as we move forward, there needs to be some outreach and discussions on some of these terms, what a wet lab is, just so the overall community of Baltimore City can get a clear understanding of this added change that's going to be taking place with wet labs, and that education piece it sounds like, has to be in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Transportation.
Madam Chair, Liam Davis, Baltimore City Department of Transportation. We stand by our bill report, which is no objection. Thank you.
Thank you. The Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, the BMZ. Well, actually, my name is Dominic McLilly here on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. BMZA defers to the Planning Commission on this bill.
Thank you. And the City Solicitor's Office.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Elena DePietro from the Law Department. We've reviewed the bill, and for the most part, we are approving it for form of legal sufficiency. I just wanted to put one item on the record. I did not flag it in my report, but the section that talks about traffic in here, it's somewhat vague, and it's going to be hard for anybody to know what minimal traffic is. But since it was not clearly a problem, I left it in. But just for future reference, when it could be a matter of enforcement down the road to maintain that level of traffic.
So Dan, could you add that to the list of, I guess giving a description of kind of what you mean by traffic and, the minimal traffic? If you want to speak on that now, you can.
Yeah, I will absolutely add that to the list. This is language that exists in the zoning code today under light industrial uses, and it's meant to describe, kind of the odd delivery and drop off or pickup, not dissimilar from an office building, right? But this is not an industrial use that's going to run trucks in and out. And so we did use the language that was already in the code in an attempt to be non-controversial on this issue, but I will add it to my list.
Thank you. Department of Transportation, is there something you'd like to
Yeah, and
add to that?
I think we're comfortable. Anytime there's a major project over a certain amount of square footage, it triggers a traffic mitigation, like a traffic impact review. So the existing regulations that are in place, we feel comfortable. If this change were to go in place, we have really good protocols to assess if any traffic mitigation needs are going to be required for each project.
Thank you. The committee will now check for public testimony. If you're online and would like to testify on this bill, please use the raise hand button to let us all know. And we don't see any hands raised on this bill. And we're now checking for callers, and we don't see any callers on this bill. And do committee members have any comments or questions at this point?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilwoman Ramos.
I just have a question for DHCD about adding to the C2s. Certainly, most of our Main Street areas are C1s. I do have I have one block on Green Mountain Avenue that's a C2, half the block. And unless it's more spelled out as to what a wet lab is, I could see communities going pretty much insane. So I'm just trying to figure out what, I certainly want to make sure that these types of businesses are able to get into spaces, and I think that obviously walkable communities are important, so being able to do that as well. I just wondered if there was anything else that you were thinking about relative to that in terms of the C2 bit, because maybe we add to the code that there has to be a very specific, if the C2 and C3 is added with conditional by board, which triggers a hearing, that there has to be very specific details of what that wet lab will be doing in order to be able to, as a condition of the condition, because we can do that, so that the public is well aware of what is occurring. So that would be something that I would be interested in. And then I have a second one, but I'll let you add.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman, for the question. I think one thing that differentiates this from the addition of the C3 and the C4 is the 1 acre requirement. And I also want to highlight that it will have to go to the BMZA, so the community will know.
Right,
They will have the
hearing.
opportunity to know and have input on anything that goes into that particular property. We believe that this amendment is in line with the intent of the rest of the bill, and it's also in line with some of the other work that we're doing, such as around the vacant reduction strategy and really opening up the latitude, broadening the latitude of the zoning categories to allow certain uses in a broader range of communities, and those uses may then lead to additional job opportunities that are in our walkable, livable neighborhoods. So in that respect, this is of interest to DHCD. Additionally, in supporting our equitable neighborhood development strategy, and as I said, making sure that access is available to a wider range of community members. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wonder, Madam Chair, if it makes sense to not vote today so that we can get a description and more details based on the questions that we have from the person who is ill and couldn't make it today. I just think that there's more, maybe it's just me that has more questions, but.
Councilman Bullock, you have a question?
Yes, actually not a question, it's more of a comment. I appreciate the bill. It seems fairly straightforward given the zoning categories we're looking at and the size. I will say I think it's also appropriate timing. Literally earlier today was actually visiting the University of Maryland Biopark in our district, had the governor there as well. And one of the challenges we deal with as a city is that we're bursting at the seams as it relates to space. And so having people and folks at startups and also more established businesses who have opportunities to do this. I will look at those lab spaces, not only in that building, but also the biotech center. There are these opportunities to have this level of employment and research happening, and not necessarily in a row home, but still in proximity to neighborhoods. So I think the type of work that's being done with this is really aimed to do. I am supportive of it. Hopefully we'll get to that point at some point, but again, it's pretty clear for me. Thank you.
So it seems like there's a consensus to hold off on voting on the amendments and the bill. We're going to go in recess, and you have some questions that have to be answered, and we'll call another
Madam
hearing.
Chair,
Yes.
just a comment. I want to be clear, I support this, but if we can get something in writing, just the definition, I kind of think we should move forward on this. If we can get the definition. I mean, it's a great idea. I just was confused about big size, small size, neighborhoods. I think, my personal opinion of voting, I think we should move forward, but we should still have that information to have, maybe you can put in the, I don't know if the amendment to make sure that can be added or answered. But I think we should move forward in terms of opportunities for communities, opportunities for young people. And I talked about Dunbar and those kind of facilities or schools that really can help our young people in terms of getting involved and working in these labs. And only reason why I'm saying this is because I got confused about it's too big, then it's too small. Can we get that some kind of way? Because I still don't understand why is it too big, but there's no size on what too small is. It's not to stop this from moving, but I'm still confused about the size. Still haven't been clear on something. That's why I was just using a row house, but I was only using row house because you're saying some of them too big, but there's no size requirement on what's too small. And it's very confusing for me.
So, Councilman Conway?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll just add a little bit of my perspective as I've been listening in and noting the importance, I think, of this bill. I think when we think about the city and the big vision for the city and how we want to position ourselves with medical research and the future of the city as medical leaders, and allowing more offices to open up, I think this is a really, really important opportunity for us. I understand there are some questions here. I think we can work through those. I am fine moving forward if we want to. If my colleagues do have concerns, I'm fine as well waiting off. But I don't have a problem moving forward as presented. But I defer to my colleagues here.
So here's what I could probably be the best thing. We do have a council meeting on Monday, and you do have some questions that have to be answered. There seems to be some concerns. There's some amendments that we have to vote on as a package. I'm going to kind of give a timeline here. If we can kind of resolve some things by Friday, and if we can't by Friday, I'm going to call, here's what I propose, that we go ahead and vote on this, and in lieu of us getting the information that we need to make things more comfortable for the committee, if we don't get those things, then I think we'll, your opinion, do you think you can accommodate this committee with the questions that have been asked upon you, and also the comment and concern from Councilwoman Ramos?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think we can provide answers to all the questions that have been raised today.
On that note, I think we should go ahead and take a vote. Is there a motion to recommend the amendments?
I just have a question on the amendments real quick.
Councilwoman Ramos.
So there was a Planning Commission amendment and a DHCD amendment, right? Can we take those separately? They're written separately, right? There's one, there's yours, and then there's
Yep, they're written
yours.
separately.
Sure, we can go ahead and we can do those amendments separately.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to recommend the amendment for the Planning Commission as favorable?
Second.
So moved by Bullock, second by Ramos, and that was for the First Amendment. And for the Second Amendment, which is the housing.
We need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, we got to go through with the vote. Chair, thank you. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock? Yes. Is a yes. Conway? Yes. Is a yes. Dorsey is absent. Glover's absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Is a yes. And Stokes? Yes. Is a yes. Okay, on the Second Amendment, number 2, which is the amendment from housing, is there a motion to move that bill? That amendment? So moved by Bullock, second by Conway. Chair Middleton is a yes. Bullock is a yes. Conway is a yes. Dorsey absent. Glover absent. Ramos?
I'm a no, and I'll just explain my vote, if I can, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I still have concerns about making sure that the public is very clear about what's going to be there, and, would promote doing, particularly for areas in actual neighborhoods, that we have a lot more detail in the descriptions when we do that. So hopefully that can be clarified by Friday, but I'm going to be a no on the amendment. Thanks.
Okay, and Stokes?
Let me explain my vote. I'm going to take BDC and planning for their word and have that information here Friday. And we're going to look forward to this committee to make sure we get those questions that we ask. So I'm going to vote yes.
Okay, 1 nay and 2 absent and 4 yes. Okay, is there a motion to recommend the bill favorable as amended? So moved by Conway. Second by Bullock. And Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock? Yes. Conway? Yes. Dorsey absent. Glover absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Is a yes, and Stokes is a yes. Okay, this bill will move to second reader at Monday's council meeting with several answers to questions. Thank you. Before we move on to the next bill, I just want to announce again that Bill number 23-0160R, the study and report for the disposal of tenant possession, the eviction chattels, has been recessed, and that another hearing date for those that have come in late on that. Next, the committee will hear Bill number 23-0396, City Street closing, a 20-foot alley and 2 10-feet alleys for the purpose of condemning and closing a 20-foot alley and 2 10-feet alleys bounded by Park Heights Avenue, Woodland Avenue, Denmore Avenue, and West Garrison Avenue, is shown on the plat numbered 317-A-28A, dated March 6, 2023, and filed in the Department of Transportation and provided for a special effective date. This bill was introduced on June 12th, 2023. The bill sponsor is the council president for the administration. We'll now hear from city agency representatives, and we'll start with planning.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The Planning Department recommends approval.
Thank you. Any questions? Moving on, Department of Housing.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Stephanie Murdoch, Director of Legislative Services for DHCD. We stand by our bill report in support of this bill. This bill would provide for the condemning and closing of the 3 alleys in support of the expansion of C.C. Jackson Park and will be home to a new Park Heights Library building. The project's located in the Park Heights Impact Investment Area and the DHCD Community Development Zone. Our Development Division, and today I have Ms. Angie Ennis here with us, our Acting Director of Project Development. We've taken significant acquisition and disposition in the Park Heights area in order to expand C.C. Jackson Park, and the passage of this bill will allow for the expansion of the park over those 3 existing alleys, in which asphalt or concrete will be removed and will be replaced in some instances with park amenities such as a play lawn and a sports field and parking. So again, we respectfully request a favorable bill report on this bill. We stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? I just comment, just definitely looking forward to this library being built, and this is really one of the first steps that is taking place to help bring that to fruition. I know the community is just still so elated about what's about to take place on with this brand new library, the first again in over 17 years for the entire city, and one of its kind, sitting on that development grounds of C.C. Jackson. So, you know, expansion of this park and all the things that are going to be taking place around that whole area. We've just did groundbreakings, and seniors are already in apartments near that facility that's going to be built, in fact, right across the street. So it's some wonderful things that are taking place there that has been definitely just one of my challenges during my terms in office, and just happy to see these things finally coming to fruition. So thank you again, Housing, and next we'll hear from Department of Transportation.
Madam Chair, Liam Davis, Baltimore City Department of Transportation. For the reasons outlined very thoroughly by Housing and Community Development, we are in full support of this legislation.
Thank you. Office of Equity and Civil Rights.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair. Dominic McLilley here with the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. The Office of Equity and Civil Rights defers to the Department of Transportation on this bill.
Thank you. And Baltimore Development Corporation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Dave Garza for Baltimore Development. We stand by our report favorable, Council Bill 230903-96. Excuse me.
Thank you. And I know, Dave, you were representing that area for a while, and I know you're happy to see some progress as well. So thank you for representing. City Solicitor's Office.
Michelle Toth on behalf of the City Solicitor's Office, and we stand by our bill report, which is approved for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, we're checking for any public testimony. And there is no public testimony or online, as well. No public, no online, and no phone callers. And is there a motion to recommend the bill favorable? So moved by Ramos and second by Bullock Chair Middleton, a definite yes. Bullock is a yes. Conway is a yes. Dorsey absent. Glover absent. Ramos is a yes. And Stokes is a yes. And this bill will be on second reader at the next council meeting. The next bill is Bill Number 23-0361, a zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 2 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district, variances, 1613 Edmondson Avenue, for the purpose of permitting, subject to certain conditions, the conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 2 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district on the property known as 1613 Edmondson Avenue, Block 122, Lot 025, as outlined in red on the accompanying plat, and providing for a special effective date. This bill was introduced on February 27th, 2023. This bill was sponsored by Councilmember Bullock. Councilmember Bullock, would you like to do some comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The applicant reached out to our office, also reached out to the community, got a good response there. The size of the property is definitely one that is fitting of 2 units. So again, it's something that we've supported, got community support. So again, appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Planning Commission. Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Madam Chair and members of the committee. Martin French for the Baltimore City Planning Department. At its regular meeting on May 18th of this year, the Planning Commission considered this City Council bill, which would permit the conversion of the single-family dwelling at 1613 Edmondson Avenue to 2 dwelling units. The Planning Commission reviewed a report, which you may have in front of you, from the Planning Department, which recommended approval of this bill. The Planning Commission made specific findings that this property is in need of having a lot area variance of 1.8%, which has been included in the bill, as the property requires 1,500 square feet and it only has 1,472.5 square feet. 1 off-street parking space would be required to serve the newly created dwelling unit. However, the property is unable to do so because the existing structure on the lot has been made landlocked by implementation of the Harlem Park 2 Urban Renewal Plan, and which is actually a city action. Therefore, a variance of the off-street parking requirement has been included in Section 3 of the bill. The statement of intent filed by the owner proposes 2 3-bedroom dwelling units, and the size of the building allows for the requirement of 1,250 square feet of gross floor area for each of those 3-bedroom units to be satisfied without need for a variance. The one thing that is required in addition is that the finding be made that this is an unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty that requires approval of variances. The department believes, and the Planning Commission agreed, that the owner is working with a building that's extremely large in relation to its lot area. It is also working with a lot for which it is impossible to provide an accessible off-street parking space. The other thing that the Planning Commission considered was that establishment and operation of a multifamily dwelling at this location would not be detrimental to or endanger public health, safety, or welfare. The proposed use is not precluded by any other law, and specifically not precluded by the Harlem Park Urban Renewal Plan. Use of this property for a multifamily dwelling is not otherwise in any way contrary to the public interest. And the authorization approved by this bill would be in harmony with the purpose and intent of the zoning code. The Commission also considered testimony relating to the details of required considerations that are contained in this staff report, and agreed with staff that the proposed use meets all of the standards required in the zoning code for approval. Therefore, the Planning Commission is recommending approval of this bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions which anyone may have. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee for the Planning Department? And seeing none, thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie Murdoch, Director of Legislative Services for DHCD. We stand by our bill report in support of 230361. The conditional use conversion may provide for the reuse of the structure and expand residential rental opportunities for area residents. So we're here to answer any questions you may have, but we respectfully ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Transportation?
Madam Chair, Liam Davis, Baltimore City Department of Transportation. We stand by our bill report, which is no objection.
Thank you. Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals?
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair. Dominic McAlilly on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. This bill is also, for their reports, being deferred to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. BDC?
Madam Chair, we stand by our report favorable for Council Bill 23-0361. Thank you.
Parking Authority?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christmas Age from the Parking Authority. We stand by our bill report, which is not opposed.
Thank you. City Solicitor's Office?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Hochstetler on behalf of the City Solicitor's Office. We do stand by our report and approve for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you. And the Baltimore City Fire Department?
Madam Chair, I'll have to confirm on that report for you.
Okay. Usually, for conditional use, we have the fire department submit something for, safety of adding, you're changing a single dwelling to two dwellings and just safety precaution, especially since these are older buildings. So on that note, we'll get that report submitted in before the next council meeting. I don't think it would hold up our vote. Any questions? We'll now check, there's no public testimony, is there? Yes, there is. I'm sorry if I don't understand your handwriting, but someone is here from 1613 Edmondson. Oh, yeah. Please come up and state your name, and you can give your testimony. Button on the right, yes.
Good day. My name is Leikano Katunji. I'm one of the owners of the property.
Okay.
Just here to state that we are trying to convert it to 2 units and looking for the support of everyone here to do so.
Thank you so much. Any questions to the owner of the property? No questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now we're checking to see if there's anyone online. Please use the hand raise function. There's no hands raised, and any phone callers? And no phone callers. Any final comments or questions from the committee? Is there a motion to recommend the bill favorable? So moved by Stokes and second by Ramos. Chair Middleton is a yes. Bullock? Yes. Yes. Conway? Yes. Yes. Dorsey absent. Glover absent. Ramos? Yes. Is a yes. And Stokes? Yes. Is a yes. This bill will be on second reader at the next council meeting. The next bill is 23-0343, another zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 3 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district, variances 633 South Montford Avenue, for the purpose of permitting, subject to certain conditions, the conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 3 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district on the property known as 633 South Montford Avenue, Block 1837, Lot 074, as outlined in red on the accompanying plat, and granting a variance from certain off-street parking requirements. This bill was introduced on January 23, 2023. This bill was sponsored by Councilmember Cohen. Planning Commission, Martin French.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. On April 6th of this year, Planning Commission considered this bill. The Planning Commission reviewed the property and noted that this is a very large building, 21 feet by 76 feet approximately. It's also on an L-shaped lot, and because of that, the L shape runs basically between Montford Avenue and a street parallel to it, so this creates a landlocked rear yard, landlocked by all the other properties that are adjacent to this property. The building, because of its size, the owner is proposing to convert to 3 one-bedroom dwelling units. There is ample square footage in the building for 3 one-bedroom dwelling units. The bill does contain some variances, and the Planning Commission reviewed these. Noted specifically that there was no lot area variance required. There is a requirement for square footage, which is met. However, there is a requirement for a setback, which was not covered in the original bill. And there is an amendment, which I believe has been prepared for the committee's consideration, which would be adding a specific variance of the setback requirement for the rear yard. The setback requirement basically is 25 feet, and the variance would be to allow a setback of 16 feet, which represents the as-built condition of the property between the rear wall of the building and what is functionally, from Montford, the rear line of the lot, but it's the back end of the L that runs away and parallel to Montford. There is also a requirement for a variance of off-street parking. As stated before, this property has no ability to provide any off-street parking, as the rear yard is landlocked by the properties that border this property. The Planning Commission found that this property's shape is unique and therefore meets the standard for uniqueness contained in the zoning code for approval of variances. There would also be a practical difficulty with complying with both the rear yard setback requirement and the off-street parking requirement, which necessitates approval of variances for this use. The Commission found that the operation of this property would not be inconsistent with any urban renewal plan, as there is not one in that area. It would not be inconsistent with the zoning code. It would be in harmony with the purpose and intent of that code. It is consistent with the comprehensive master plan, and there is no historic or architectural preservation district which would be affected by this particular proposal. Use of this property as 3 dwelling units would not be detrimental to or endanger public health, safety, or welfare, or be in any way contrary to the public interest. The department is therefore recommending approval of the Planning Commission's report with the addition of the amendment which is being offered jointly between the Planning Department and the Law Department. And please let me know if you have a copy of this for your consideration.
Yes, the committee should have a copy.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you. What we'll do now is the sponsor of the bill, Councilman Cohen, has arrived. If you want to say a few words on this bill, and if you also include if you approve the amendments.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the staff that's here. Appreciate the report. We do support the amendments, and talked to the Neighborhood Association about this bill in particular. They are supportive. They do make a note, and they indicated to me as well that they are advocating for more public transportation, because we know that parking is a challenge, but there's no amount of added parking that's going to solve our problem here. So grateful to the Patterson Park Neighborhood Association that spent some time thinking this through. Appreciate their support for this conversion. I do believe this is appropriate density, and fully concur with their recommendation that the city really push hard on public transit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before we move on to housing, does the committee have any questions for planning or the sponsor? Seeing none, Department of Housing, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, again for DHCD. We stand by our bill report in support of this bill, and we stand by to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Transportation.
Madam Chair, Liam Davis, Baltimore City Department of Transportation. We stand by our bill report, which is no objection. Thank you.
Municipal and zoning appeals.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Dominic McLilly, Mayor's Office of Government Relations. The BMZA defers to the Planning Commission on this bill.
Thank you. Baltimore Development Corp.
Madam Chair, BDC stands by its report. No objection on Bill 23-0343.
Thank you. Parking Authority.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Arco San from the Parking Authority, and we stand by a bill report which is not opposed.
Thank you. Hiding in that corner over there. City Solicitor's Office.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Jeff Hochstetler with the Solicitor's Office. Subject to the amendment discussed by Planning, law can approve for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you. And again, the Fire Department.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dominic McLilly, Mayor's Office of Government Relations. The Fire Department does not have opposition to this bill.
At this point, do committee members have any questions? Hearing none, we're checking. There's no public testimony. We're checking for online. Please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, any phone callers? And there's no phone callers. Any final comments or questions from the committee? Is there a motion to move the amendments of this bill favorable? So moved by Bullock. Second by Ramos. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock? Yes. Conway? Yes. Dorsey absent. Glover absent. Ramos? Is a yes. And Stokes? Is a yes. And is there a motion to recommend the bill favorable as amended? So moved by Conway, second by Ramos. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock is a yes. Conway is a yes. Dorsey, Glover absent. Ramos is a yes. And Stokes is a yes. This bill will be on second reader at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Cohen. Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you for the bill.
You're welcome. The committee will now hear, this bill, as I mentioned, is in recess, and we'll call a hearing for that, and that was it. And that is it, and this committee is now adjourned.